Earlier today, then, 31 countries put out a powerful message. The war must end now. There must be aid going into Gaza, unrestricted. The hostages must be released, and all parties must uphold international law. It was sent to Israel, and by return, this powerful message was rejected. It was denounced by Israel as disconnected from reality.
Shocking.
So what now?
How can it be that we have a situation where IDF are firing at children, systematically going for head, stomach and testicles before their sport, and we have Rafah razed to the ground and this euphemistic humanitarian city being constructed, which the former Prime Minister of Israel called a concentration camp? When are we going to take the appropriate action to bring about comprehensive and full trade and arms embargo and concentrate the mind of Israel? Because nothing else is working. They're not listening. They're getting away with murder every single day.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like others in this House, I'm frankly astonished at the statement of the Foreign Secretary. At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on. He himself said there's a massive prison camp being constructed in the south of Gaza. He knows that leading genocide scholars from across the world now are ringing the alarm bells, and yet he has the temerity to show up to this House and wave his chequebook as if it's going to salve his conscience. Can he not see that his inaction and, frankly, cowardice is making this country irrelevant? Can he also not see the personal risk to him, given our international obligations, that he may end up at the Hague because of his inaction? And finally, really frankly, an appeal to the Labour backbenchers. We can't get your leadership to change their minds. Only you can, if you organise and insist on change.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, with permission, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the Middle East. I'll begin on Syria. We've been horrified by the recent violence in the south, including civilian deaths. Clashes between Druze and Bedouin militias have quickly escalated into intense fighting, with involvement from government forces and further Israeli strikes on the Syrian military. As I said directly to Foreign Minister Shabani, we want to see the fighting ended, civilians protected, and the rights of all Syrians upheld. The violence in Sawada must be investigated and those responsible held accountable. We want humanitarian access to be restored, aid delivered, and Syria's sovereignty must be respected. The UK can be proud of our support to the Syrian people over many, many years. And a stable Syria matters to the UK's national interests for terrorism, for irregular migration, for regional stability. We must work to prevent extremism, sectarianism, or lawlessness taking hold now that Assad is gone. That's why we're backing a sustainable ceasefire, and that is why we support an inclusive transition, and it's why I visited Damascus recently to support and to press the new government to meet its commitments. I'll now turn to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. It's 2.5 months since Prime Minister Netanyahu restarted offensive operations. The IDF has driven Palestinians out of 86% of Gaza, leaving around 2 million people trapped in an area scarcely over 20 square miles. Whatever this Israeli government might claim, repeated displacement of so many civilians is not keeping them safe. In fact, it's quite the reverse. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the new Israeli aid system is inhumane, it's dangerous, and it deprives Gazans of human dignity. It contradicts long-established humanitarian principles. It creates disorder Hamas is now exploiting, with distribution points reduced from 400 to just 4. It forces desperate civilians, children among them, to scramble unsafely for the essentials of life. It's a grotesque spectacle, wrecking a terrible human cost. Almost 1,000 civilians have been killed since May, seeking aid, including 100, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this weekend alone. There are near daily reports of Israeli troops opening fire on people to access food. Israeli jets have hit women and children waiting for a health clinic to open. An Israeli drone has struck down children filling water containers, which Israeli officials blamed on a technical error. Hamas is, of course, contributing to the chaos and taking advantage of it. But I utterly condemn the killing of civilians seeking to meet their basic needs. The Israeli government must answer what possible military justification can there be for strikes that have killed desperate, starving children? What immediate actions are they taking to stop this litany of horrors? And what will they do to hold those responsible to account? Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've said before, I'm a steadfast supporter of Israel's security and its right to exist. I treasure the many connections between our peoples, and the horrors of October the 7th must never be forgotten. But I firmly believe the Israeli government's action are doing untold damage to Israel's standing in the world and undermining Israel's long-term security. Netanyahu should listen to the Israeli people, 82% of whom desperately want a ceasefire, and to the hostage families, because they know it offers the best chance to bring their loved ones home. Those hostages may be hidden in cramped tunnels under the ruins of Gaza, but we will not forget them or Hamas's despicable actions, and we will continue to demand their unconditional release. This offensive puts them in grave danger, but still Netanyahu persists. Indeed, Minister Katz has gone further, proposing to drive Gaza's entire population into Rafah, imprisoning Palestinians unless persuaded to emigrate. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a cruel vision which must never come to pass, and I condemn it unequivocally. Permanent forced displacement is a violation of international humanitarian law. Many Israelis themselves are appalled. A former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, said it marches us into an abyss. He was right. Mr. Speaker, today I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now. There is no military solution. Negotiations will secure the hostages. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. Hamas and Israel must both commit to a ceasefire now, and the next ceasefire must be the last ceasefire. I thank the United States, Qatar and Egypt for their tireless efforts, and I'm sure all members share my intense frustration that it has not happened. Until there is a breakthrough, we must keep doing all we can to relieve the suffering. UK aid has saved lives, reaching hundreds of thousands with food, water, hygiene and sanitation, and essential health care. And under the most appalling circumstances, our aid is saving lives today. That includes the almost £9 million the UK has provided to UK Med since we entered office, reaching 500,000 patients inside Gaza, 24,000 in the past fortnight alone. Like 3-year-old Razan, UK-funded medics removed a bullet from her neck after nearly 3 hours of surgery. These doctors and nurses working in the most extreme conditions are true heroes. They deserve the thanks and the admiration of the entire House. We're also working, of course, multilaterally. The 149 trucks from the World Food Programme and UNICEF entering Gaza in recent days included food supplies funded by the United Kingdom, and 1,000 more trucks laden with aid paid for by British taxpayers can enter the moment the Israeli government lets them in. Today I'm announcing an extra £40 million worth for humanitarian assistance in Gaza this year, including £7.5 million for UK Med to sustain their vital operations in Gaza and save more lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, accompanying the horrors in Gaza, there is an accelerating campaign to prevent a further Palestinian state in the West Bank. It's embraced by Netanyahu. It's encouraged by his ministers. It's driven by an extremist ideology which wants to suffocate the two-state solution, the only route to a lasting peace and security. We see it in the unprecedented pace of settlement expansion, in the shocking levels of settler violence, even settler terrorism. For that is what the most egregious ideological attacks are, and it is the deliberate attempts to squeeze the Palestinian Authority, unjustly denying it access to its own funds, and it harms Israel's long-term interests in the process. Now the Israeli government is reintroducing plans to construct new units in the E1 area of occupied East Jerusalem. If built, this settlement would separate the West Bank north from its south and Palestinians in the West Bank from East Jerusalem. These plans are wholly unacceptable, they are illegal, and they must not happen. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are striving to keep open the prospects of a two-state solution. UK assistance has been preserving the Palestinian Authority, contributing to essential Palestinian workers' salaries and supporting them to progress critical reforms. Today I can confirm we are enhancing our support, providing £7 million to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian governance, implementing the agreement signed by myself and PM Mustafa earlier this year, and we're delivering the reform plans that President Abbas has set out. I can also confirm that we're providing £20 million worth to support UNRWA's many services for Palestinian refugees. And alongside this support, we are leading diplomatic efforts to show that there must be a viable pathway to a Palestinian state involving the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, in the security and governance of the area. Hamas can have no role in the governance of Gaza, nor use it as a launchpad for terrorism. Israeli ministers should support the Palestinian Authority, not actively undermine its economy, as Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smodrit are doing. The UK is co-leading with Egypt the humanitarian and reconstruction track for the forthcoming two-state solution conference, and we are pushing to agree plans for a credible next phase in Gaza with a responsible reform PA at their core. So we turn any temporary ceasefire into a lasting peace. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in our year in office, this Labour government has acted to address this horrendous conflict. We've restored funding to UNRWA after the Tories froze it. We suspended arms export licences when the Tories declined to act. We've provided nearly £250 million in humanitarian assistance this year and next, getting medical treatment and food to hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza. We've stood with the hostage families at every stage. We've worked with Jordan to fly medicines into Gaza, with Egypt to treat medically evacuated civilians, with Kuwait and UNICEF to help children in Gaza. We've delivered 3 sanctions packages on violent settlers, suspended trade negotiations with the Israeli government, and sanctioned far-right Israeli ministers for incitement. We've defended the independence of the international courts. We've signed a landmark agreement with the Palestinian Authority and hosted the Palestinian Prime Minister in London, pushing for the reform it needs. We called for, worked for, voted for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages at every possible opportunity, and we will keep doing so until this war is over. Hamas releases the hostages and we finally have a pathway to a two-state solution. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The violence, loss of life and conflicts that continue in the Middle East shock us all. The events in the Middle East have a direct impact upon our national interests and to people living in our own country, from the concerns about family members in the regions to demonstrations on our street, and from the threats from Iran to the rise of anti-Semitism. This side of the House is clear that we want to see an end of the conflict in Gaza, a return of the hostages, humanitarian support, which is so desperately needed, must get in, and an end to the terror inflicted by Hamas and Iran. But the reality of peace and a sustainable end to the conflict in Gaza seems to be drifting further away. What is Britain's role when it comes to workable outcomes and practical solutions to advance an end to this conflict? And what diplomatic action is being taken with regional allies and the US? Where is Britain's voice and action when it comes to putting new pressure on Hamas to agree the most recent US proposals to secure a ceasefire and release the hostages who've been in cruel captivity for more than 650 days? On the statement the Foreign Secretary signed earlier today, can he confirm or explain what an unconditional and permanent ceasefire means for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority? Last week I met with Keith and Ava Siegel, hearing their harrowing experience of being held in brutal captivity by Hamas. I paid tribute to their incredible bravery and their resilience and dedication to securing the freedom of the remaining hostages, from Gail to Ziv Berman to Matan Angras and Omi Moran, and all those being held in barbaric captivity. They must be returned to their loved ones. The hostages are denied humanitarian access by Hamas. What is the government doing about this? And when was his last intervention on this particular issue? On aid to Gaza, this situation has deteriorated beyond all rational comprehension. The daily reports of casualties seeking aid are appalling, and we utterly condemn these attacks. But our words and political statements of condemnation are not saving lives. So what practical solutions, proposals and options has the Foreign Secretary and the British government discussed with Israel on aid supplies into Gaza? What dialogue is there to find an agreement on getting aid supplies and access open that goes beyond the current dangerous approach that has been adopted? I remind the House that the last Conservative government, through Lord Cameron, secured new aid routes and better aid access to save lives. Surely, in light of the desperate urgency of the situation we all see, calls for such options have to be considered once again. On settlement, I reiterate our long-standing position that these are not helpful to achieving long-term peace. Israel should not take steps that could make a two-state solution more difficult, and it must use its legal system to clamp down on settler violence. We want a two-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both Israeli and Palestinians, and I'm sure Palestinians, and I'm sure that he agrees it should only come at a time that is conducive to peace, and that it cannot be at the start of a process, and certainly not while Israeli hostages are still in captivity in Gaza. And does the Foreign Secretary agree that there needs to be a clear plan and international measures to see the exit of Hamas from Gaza? On Syria, the barbaric violence we have witnessed in recent days cannot continue. All groups and minorities in Syria must be protected, and the Foreign Secretary has mentioned his recent discussions with the transitional Syrian leadership. Did he convey to those in charge that they have a responsibility to end the armed conflict in their country and guarantee the protection of all minority groups in Syria before international community removes sanctions and normalises diplomatic relationships? What assurances has he received from the transitional government? And have these commitments been met in any way with measurable action? Will he update the House on whether any of the £64.5 million of money dedicated to Syria announced by the government earlier this month will be used to deal with the aftermath of these latest clashes, and how will it be spent? Can the Foreign Secretary also confirm whether he deems sufficient action has been taken by the interim government on the destruction of chemical weapons in Syria? Does he believe the HTS government is capable of securing Syria's borders? And can he also explain whether he intends to change the prescribed status of HTS? On sanctions, can he give us his assessment on the effect of the sanctions already lifted, and if they have had any unintended side effects? Syria's future still hangs in the balance, and we need to be wholly evidence-led on our approach. The Foreign Secretary did not mention Iran, but we understand from reports that Iran, Britain, France and Germany are due to hold nuclear talks in Istanbul on Friday. Can he confirm the purpose of these talks? Is he coordinating actions with the United States? And what is the content of the deal the Foreign Secretary would like to see going forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the tone of her remark and the cross-party consensus that exists in this House that this war must come to an end, and the huge concern that we all have, not just in this House, but also in the international community, about the humanitarian suffering that we continue to see. And just on that point, she raises what more can be done and praise and aid the work of the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron. She will recognise that Lord Cameron and, prior to that, former Foreign Secretary, cleverly, all raised with the Israelis the situation, the humanitarian situation. It has got steadily worse. It's now down to 4 aid points and this new foundation offering aid, but people dying as they scramble for that aid. I note in her remarks she did not say that we should go back to the 400 aid points that we had in the past, and she will note that her government did not refund funding to UNRWA. But we believe the UN and its system are best placed to deliver aid to Gaza, and that is the position that we continue to maintain. She raises also against that backdrop what we are doing in terms of our multilateral and doing to work with others to bring this to an end. Can I ask her to read the statement that landed? 31 countries have now signed up to that statement, and of course we are pressing and working with colleagues. That's why I spoke to Minister Saar once again today, to urge him to do the right thing, to get a ceasefire, but to look now clearly at this aid system that's not working. And then on governance, she will know that we will participate in the two-state conference that's been organised by France in a couple of weeks' time, and she will know that that conference is now dedicated to looking closely at the governance arrangements that you've got to put in place. When Hamas leave, and they must go and they can't govern Gaza, how do we ensure that this is not a 60-day pause, but we bring an end to this and we move to the two-state solution? And she knows our commitment to recognition as set out in our manifesto, and the conversation that's going on internationally in relation to recognition. She rightly presses the case on Syria. And of course, when I met with al-Shara, I was absolutely clear that this government had to be inclusive. I pressed him on his former background as a terrorist and our concerns, the concerns that will exist in this chamber. But we must work with him to ensure that it's inclusive, to ensure that security is fundamental, and she'll understand we have much that we need to do to support them on counter-terrorism at this time. And in a country where 90% of people are living in poverty, to ensure that people get the aid and the support they need, and indeed the areas affected by the murders that we saw over the last few days.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thorne.
Deputy Speaker. Earlier today, then, 31 countries put out a powerful message. The war must end now. There must be aid going into Gaza, unrestricted. The hostages must be released, and all parties must uphold international law. It was sent to Israel, and by return, this powerful message was rejected. It was denounced by Israel as disconnected from reality.
Shocking.
So what now? So what now? In that statement, the 31 nations said we are prepared to take further action to support an immediate ceasefire and political pathways to security and peace for Israel, Palestine and the entire region. So what are we going to do, may I ask? And does that include the final recognition of Palestine?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady is right to call into question so quickly the Israeli government rejecting the advice of its friends and 31 countries coming together, horrified by those who are losing their life simply reaching out to get aid and humanitarian care. She, of course, references the debate that exists in relation to recognition. Let me tell her that we will be working with our French colleagues who are focusing the upcoming conference particularly on two states and how we get to two states. And as you would expect, the UK will play its part. On the broader issues, I hope and pray that we get a ceasefire, and of course that will lead to further activity as we head towards UNGA.
Liberal Democrat frontbench spokesman Callum Miller.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. I welcome his commitment to a diplomatic resolution in Syria and to holding the governments of Syria and Israel accountable for protecting all civilians and especially minorities. The Foreign Secretary is right to say that the situation in Gaza is inhumane and grotesque. And he is right that a ceasefire is desperately needed. I welcome the aid allocations that he has announced. But the problem is that the situation is not new. And the problem is that repeated expressions of regret by this government have not prevented further carnage being wrought by the Netanyahu government. The whole House saw the passion with which the Right Honourable Gentleman announced the British, French and Canadian joint position on the 20th of May, and with which the Minister for the Middle East sanctioned Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir on the 10th of June. In those statements, ministers said that, and I quote, "we cannot stand by," and that they would respond, quote, "not just with words but with actions." I think they meant it. And yet, 2 months later, the Secretary of State has only words, not actions. His joint statement with other countries today says once again only, quote, "we are prepared to take further action." And yet, children queuing for food or water are still being killed every single day as the Israeli cabinet maintains its grotesque blockade of humanitarian aid and now proposes an open-air prison for all Gazans, which, according to Ehud Olmert, would amount to ethnic cleansing. And yet I spoke today to the Oxfordshire doctors, Nick Maynard and Nada Al-Hadithi from Nasser Hospital in Gaza. They described the desperation of civilians facing the latest Israeli attack on Deir al-Balah, the deaths of patients for want of basic dressings, and that IDF snipers fired directly into the hospital compound. And yet, settlers in the West Bank continue illegally to occupy Palestinian homes and land. And yet, the remaining hostages held in Gaza now for over 650 days at the hands of Hamas terrorists are no closer to release. I've written to the Foreign Secretary frequently to set out the many more steps Liberal Democrats believe he should take. So I will simply ask, does the Foreign Secretary truly believe that his government is doing all it can to put an end to the terrible violence and starvation being visited in Gaza in clear contravention of international law? Can he explain why there have been so few consequences since he and the minister spoke so powerfully in the last 2 months? And can he dispel the widespread view that he is not setting the policy he would choose, but that he is instead being reined in by Number 10's desire not to upset President Trump by acting more boldly?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that I would actually want to associate my remarks with much that he said. It is a source of great regret to me that we have not brought this most horrendous of wars and conflict to an end. The Right Honourable Lady who chairs the Select Committee raised the response I had not heard whilst I have been sat in this chamber, the response of the Israeli government to the statement signed by 31. That ignoring of the international community is tarnishing greatly the reputation of Israel. I listed in my speech the action that this government has taken since coming to office in the last year. He knows that this government has led much of the multilateral effort, and that sits behind both the statement of the leaders a few weeks ago and the statement of foreign secretaries today. We will continue to press. We continue, of course, to look at what further we may need to do, as he would expect. But let me tell him that I wish I could say too that were we to recognise tomorrow it would bring this war to an end. I'm afraid I'm not sure that is the case. What is required now is painstaking diplomacy to get to that ceasefire, and my assessment is we will not see that ceasefire until the Knesset rises.
Order. Order. Once again, we have a very large number of honourable members who wish to take part in this discussion. And the intention is to try to accommodate everybody, but that will mean members exercising a degree of self-restraint that was not entirely evident in the previous session. I leave it to you, but if you want everybody to be called, then please, questions, not statements, and if I may say so, Foreign Secretary, relatively brief answers. Andy MacDonald.
Deputy Speaker, sorry, I missed that. I mean, this statement we have from the 25 or 31 partners, it takes us no further forward. So we're prepared to take further action to support an immediate ceasefire. It's action that people are wanting, not more repetition of we call for, we demand, we urge. We want action, and this isn't action. We've had this so many times before. We've got this terrible humanitarian crisis, forcible transfer of civilians, the starvation by Israel, replacing... How can it be that we have a situation where IDF are firing at children, systematically going for head, stomach and testicles before their sport, and we have Rafah razed to the ground and this euphemistic humanitarian city being constructed, which the former Prime Minister of Israel called a concentration camp? When are we going to take the appropriate action to bring about comprehensive and full trade and arms embargo and concentrate the mind of Israel? Because nothing else is working. They're not listening. They're getting away with murder every single day.
The Honourable Gentleman clearly didn't listen to a word that I said, but I'm sure that the Foreign Secretary did.
I understand my honourable friend's frustration, and he has been consistent with that for a very long time. And as I've said, I regret that we are not at a place where we currently have a ceasefire, despite the international community that, calling for one and the pressure that exists. And he's right. What we are seeing at the moment is an abomination, and I would join him with those remarks.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Of course we all condemn the evil Hamas, but is not Prime Minister Netanyahu the biggest recruiting sergeant for Hamas? For every fighter he kills, he's radicalising the whole world against the State of Israel because of this appalling humanitarian solution. Now, I agree with everything the Foreign Secretary says, but I think we say to him that our word's enough. I just wonder whether he will oblige the House of Commons now and have a free vote, and I bet this will pass, this motion will pass by an enormous majority in the House of Commons for further actions against the extreme right-wing actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu, sanctions and recognising the State of Palestine.
Well, I hope that the Israeli government is watching and notes what senior parliamentarians are saying on both sides of this House, and he will know that 83% of the population now want a ceasefire, and he will have seen the remarks of former prime ministers and all of the opposition in Israel who condemned the most recent proposals suggested by Minister Katz.
Paul Wall.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Earlier this month I hosted in Parliament Dr Wasim Saeed, who's a British surgeon who'd returned from Gaza working in the Nasser hospital, where he treated children for severe burns, amputations and shrapnel wounds that were crawling with maggots. He showed us videos which would shock everybody in this House. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Israel should face a reckoning in the courts for such injuries and deaths, and that the UK should force such a reckoning? And more importantly, does he agree that recognising a state of Palestine is really about recognising the humanity of the Palestinian people, and that their children deserve to have an equal worth of every child on this planet?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that the Palestinian cause is a just cause. And I would ask the Israeli government to reflect again on international humanitarian law. I've got in front of me the practitioner's legal handbook, and I'm hugely concerned that there feel to be breaches as I read through it.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The deaths of those trying to access aid in Gaza is truly shocking. However, the Foreign Secretary will be aware that the number of civilians killed is being disputed by Israel and there are suggestions of disinformation. Does he agree that one way in which we could establish what is actually happening is that the international media organisations like the BBC and Reuters were allowed full access into Gaza?
Yes, 100%.
Uma Kumaran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Each time members come together for a statement on the Middle East, there's a new horror to comment on, a new inhumanity unfolding, a new form of strong words from the dispatch box. Last week, IDF shells hit a church sheltering 600 civilians. Several people were killed. The Pope called it barbarity. Yesterday, a World Food Programme convoy came under fire from Israeli forces, despite numerous assurances that humanitarian operational conditions would improve. Innocent Palestinians who were queuing for desperately needed food were killed. According to MSF, we're witnessing in real time the creation of conditions for the eradication of Palestinian lives in Gaza. So I asked the Foreign Secretary, where is this government's red line? At what point does our basic humanity require us to take stronger action? Many of us in this House think the red line was passed a long time ago.
Well, can I remind my honourable friend of the action that this government have taken and how we have tried to lead in the international community on this issue. But can I also join her in condemning what we've seen in relation to civilians? Page 28 of the Practitioner's Handbook on Conflict, Hunger and International Humanitarian Law makes it clear that parties to armed conflict must take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare the civilian population, civilians and civilian objects. Clearly, that is not happening.
Kick Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like others in this House, I'm frankly astonished at the statement of the Foreign Secretary. At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on. He himself said there's a massive prison camp being constructed in the south of Gaza. He knows that leading genocide scholars from across the world now are ringing the alarm bells, and yet he has the temerity to show up to this House and wave his chequebook as if it's going to salve his conscience. Can he not see that his inaction and, frankly, cowardice is making this country irrelevant? Can he also not see the personal risk to him, given our international obligations, that he may end up at the Hague because of his inaction? And finally, really frankly, an appeal to the Labour backbenchers. We can't get your leadership to change their minds. Only you can, if you organise and insist on change.
Before I bring in the Foreign Secretary, can I just remind members that we have got other business to proceed to tonight. So please keep questions and answers short. Foreign Secretary.
I understand the fury that the right honourable gentleman feels, but I have to tell him, that it demeans his argument when he personalises it in the way that he does, and it is not, it's unbecoming and not something that the House expects, particularly of more senior members.
Alex Ballinger.
Deputy Speaker, we've seen again images of children dying of starvation and malnutrition, and this comes after months of warnings by the UN system about the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's announcement of more aid, but we know the GHF will not allow more UK aid in. He said to me 10 days ago at the Foreign Affairs Committee that if there was not a ceasefire, he would consider further action against Israel. As we've seen, the Israelis respond to calls for a ceasefire by launching a new offensive in Deir el-Balah. What further actions will we take to try and end this catastrophic situation?
Can I just say to my honourable friend that we have actually been able to get some further aid in with the World Food Programme, and of course that's important. And it is also right to say that with our funding of UK Med, we have been able to save lives, and of course we must endeavour every single day to make the humanitarian situation better.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary appeared before the Foreign Affairs Committee on the 8th of July and was asked what would happen if we do not see a ceasefire in Gaza in the coming weeks. He was further asked whether the British government would take further measures against Israel. The Foreign Secretary was pensive and said yes. The British government would be taking further measures if the abomination in Gaza continued. Can he tell the House what those further measures are, or at the very least, when we might see them?
Yeah.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, we are doing everything we can supporting our Qatari, Egyptian and US friends to get a ceasefire. And he will understand that in looking closely at these issues, even if we are contemplating further measures, they work more effectively if you can coordinate allies.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ground invasion of Deir al-Balah is the latest to add to the daily attacks of Gazans and further evidence that the conflict has gone too far. The Israeli foreign ministers have already rejected the joint statement signed by 31 countries, including our governments. Can the Foreign Secretary outline what additional specific steps he will take with others to bring about a ceasefire and secure aid to starving Gazans?
Well, can I say to honourable friend, I set out in my speech the action that this government has taken, and I stand by it. I regret that we have not brought a ceasefire. I have set out also the more aid that we are attempting to get in and how we're supporting the Palestinian people, including the Palestinian Authority, and I stand by that.
Stephen Flynn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Foreign Secretary's watching in his statement today, he has refused to call it a genocide. He's refused to end all arms sales to Israel, and of course he continues to refuse to recognise the state of Palestine. So here's something he could do. On his watch, just 2 wee kids who've been bombed or shot by the Israeli forces have been evacuated to the UK for medical treatment. Now, the First Minister of Scotland wrote to the Prime Minister saying that we stand ready to provide hospital treatment to those children. Shamefully, the Prime Minister hasn't even bothered to respond. So will he do what his boss won't and commit the UK to making sure that children who've been bombed by Israel are treated?
Order. Foreign Secretary.
Can I say to honourable gentlemen that we have suspended arms sales that could be used in Gaza? And he should look closely at our export licensing regime, because much of it is not about arms. It's about, for example, equipment that we send to support NGOs and others who are in the area. And of course, I'm happy to look with the Home Secretary at what more we can do for children who are suffering.
Tan Singh Sitisi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers say it's for the courts to decide whether genocide has occurred in Gaza, but the Genocide Convention is aimed primarily at prevention. And the ICJ has already found that there is a plausible risk of genocide and advised that all states must act collectively to prevent it. While the occupying Israeli forces are accelerating the building of illegal settlements in the West Bank, the scenes in Gaza are horrific, with almost 1,000 people being killed by the IDF just while seeking aid. We're seeing the starvation being used as a weapon, forced displacement of Gazans, the mass civilian deaths, and senior Israeli officials are using dehumanizing language while proposing to concentrate Gazans into a mass detention camp. So, Foreign Secretary, when will the government take decisive action with international partners to prevent genocide?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and he prays and aid the law in terms of plausibility in breach of international humanitarian law, if he looks at my statement back in September, I assessed that there was a clear risk of breaching international humanitarian law, and it's for that reason that I suspended arms sales.
I am aiming to finish this statement around 7:45, so people will be able to see. I don't think I'll be able to get everybody in with the length of questions. David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I mean, everybody condemns the deaths as people queue for aid. But this aid system that was enforced is only possible because of the support of the United States in its delivery. So what is the Foreign Secretary doing to persuade the United States that this is not the way to deliver aid into Gaza?
Well, I want to reassure him that I have made representations to Secretary of State Rubio about my concerns with the aid system And I've done that alongside many European foreign ministers and members of the G7.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently met with the mother of Oz Daniel, a 19-year-old who was murdered by Hamas on the 7th of October, and his dead body was dragged into Gaza. Oz loved to play music, he loved Guns N' Roses, and was a brilliant guitar player. This is about a mum who just wants her dead son's body bringing home. A senior US official has said that Israel is bending over backwards to agree a ceasefire, and it is Hamas that is blocking it. Will the Foreign Secretary set out what pressure the government is applying to Hamas by Qatar and Egypt to agree a ceasefire and to bring the hostages home?
The honourable gentleman is right to the extent that the challenge faced on the ceasefire has been principally that Hamas do not want to pause, and the Israeli government has said that they do want to pause. There's also been discussion of what withdrawal we would see of the IDF within Israel, and of course changing the humanitarian aid system. That is why a ceasefire has remained stuck. But it is my hope that once the Knesset rises on the 22nd, we will move to a ceasefire.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the Foreign Secretary follows the diplomatic path, will he ensure that in the discussions of the two-state solution, it is borne in mind that not only does the state of Palestine exist in that two-state solution, but also Israel's neighbours do need to recognise Israel's right to exist?
Yes, I will.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Najwa Ahmed Fati Radwan and Mohammed Hassan Yusuf Dawood are just two of the tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have been killed in Gaza. Many of their names were read out over the course of 12 hours at a really powerful vigil that I joined in Aylesbury Town Centre this weekend. Yet today that list of dead children has likely just got longer with Israel's assault on Deir al-Balah. Will the Foreign Secretary say to his Israeli counterparts, enough is enough?
Can I reassure my honourable friend that I said that this morning to my Israeli foreign counterpart?
And before I call the next speaker, I heard some unacceptable comments directed at a member in this chamber, and I will not be having that. So until I find out from the clerks who said those words, we are investigating it. So please do be assured that I will investigate it. Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary at the beginning of his remarks mentioned the savagery that's unfolding in southern Syria and said that he'd spoken to his Syrian interlocutor, Minister Shabani, about it. Has he spoken to Tel Aviv about it, since the only country that has visibly come to the assistance of the Druze for all the criticism that has been rightly aimed at it is Israel? And if he has, can he say what his assessment is of the wisdom or otherwise of the action that Israel has taken?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the UK is clear that we expect Israel to adhere to their commitment that their presence in the area of separation in the south is both limited and temporary. And that I did press the foreign minister, the Israeli foreign minister, on their activity, which I worry destabilises the situation further.
Debbie Abrahams.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I recognise the Foreign Secretary's labours to get as many international allies on board, and I recognise the importance of that. But clearly we must do more. This is not enough, given Israel's flaunting of international law and the devastating consequences of that, including, I understand, that Israeli soldiers are reporting being told to kill children, to point and shoot. It's completely unacceptable. So as a starting point, perhaps we could ensure that we are refusing entry to the Israeli Air Force chief to visit the Royal International Air Tattoo, as well as others having said, how are we going to get children who need care over here?
Well, I said that I will look at the issue of what more we can do should children require medical aid in our own country. If what she has said is correct, then that would constitute a war crime, very clearly. We cannot have soldiers turning their guns on children, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on any decision that might come to me.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I hosted Keith and Aviva Siegel, both of whom were hostages and were released. The previous week I met families of hostages who all pleaded with all of us to get the hostages released. They've now been in captivity for 654 days without any access from the International Red Cross. So will the Foreign Secretary call out Hamas to enable the International Red Cross to go and see those hostages and to make sure they're being treated humanely?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right, and I did say in my statement that Hamas are making hay with the chaos that exists on the ground, and it is quite wrong to restrict the support of organisations like the Red Cross and the Red Crescent.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister responded to my questions on Gaza in Liaison Committee this afternoon by saying we need a ceasefire and we need it straight away. The situation on the ground is intolerable. How will we get that ceasefire when the Israeli government has already rejected the statement by Foreign Secretary and his allied ministers as disconnected from reality? The will of the House is clear on this matter, that it wants action, not words. Yes. Why is he not hearing that?
Yeah. Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and I thank him for his long-standing campaigning on these issues, of course I'm hearing the strength of feeling in the House. How could you not? And of course the Israeli government can see the strength of feeling in the House. He knows the list of actions that the UK has taken. He knows the work that we're doing with close allies. He knows too that we have not brought this war to an end. And he will be familiar with the work that we're doing with countries like Qatar and Egypt and the United States to bring about a ceasefire.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday it was reported, as honourable members will be aware, that at least 93 Palestinians were shot and killed whilst queuing for GHF distributed food because they and their families are being starved to death. The fact that GHF stands for Gaza Humanitarian Foundation smacks of an Orwellian doublespeak which I find profoundly disturbing. The Foreign Secretary must surely agree that the current system of aid distribution, headed by the GHF, is both unsafe and grossly inadequate. Is the Secretary of State content that Britain is doing all it can to ensure it is not complicit in the grotesque use of starvation as a tool of war?
Well, I'd want to associate my remarks with what the Honourable Lady has said and to ensure her, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of everyone in this chamber, there will be no complicity of any of us in acts where there could be a clear risk of a breach of international humanitarian law.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I heard from Keith and Aviva Siegel. They had been held hostage by Hamas, and there was a powerful reminder from them that until all hostages are released, no hostage is released. That's true for Avinatan Or and for his family. It's true for Gali and Zeev Berman and for their family too. And in fact, it's the families of hostages who are some of the loudest voices calling for an end to this war. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps he is taking to ensure that the next ceasefire is permanent seeing hostages get out of Gaza and aid get in?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's absolutely right to mention the hostages that he does, and he knows that I meet regularly with hostage families and did a few weeks ago in my office, and he's absolutely right that the overwhelming majority of the Israeli people, 83%, want a ceasefire so the hostages can get out, and they want it to be a sustained and enduring ceasefire, which is not currently the position of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Carly Danier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women has said that Palestinian mothers are repeatedly watching their children slowly starve to death, be maimed, be killed and be buried alive, and that this is deliberate, part of Israel's strategy to physically and psychologically destroy women and the continuity of the Palestinian people. She called this a femi-genocide. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has repeatedly said the situation is intolerable. Yet by failing to pull every single lever that this government could, it is tolerating it. So when will he stand on the right side of history and implement a full arms embargo, widespread sanctions, a ban on the import of settlement goods and funding evidence collection for prosecutions?
Well, can I say, to Honourable Lady, I stand by all the decisions that we've made as a government. I listed them, and they're numerous in my statement. And I just say that on the full arms embargo, I am content that we're not sending arms that could be used in Gaza. I ask her to look closely at the export licensing regime, because there are many things that are sent to Israel, and actually they go and they're for use by NGOs in Israel. Sometimes it's so that they themselves are not injured in theatres of conflict.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If not starved and emaciated children, doctors have told us that they walk into the emergency room and see little tiny bodies strewn across the floor with burns, blasts and bullets. Their job is to choose which child to save and which ones they will have to let go. That is decision-making. And the Foreign Secretary has an option right before him to make a decision which could make a difference to those children. One, to protect all health facilities, and the means to do that at the UN, and I trust that he will. But secondly, if he doesn't recognise the state of Palestine, there will be no state left to recognise.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the vision that she paints, and I'd want to associate myself with the remarks that she makes in relation to children, and particularly in starvation and the situation that they face. And of course, we are working closely with the UN system. I spoke to Tom Fletcher at the beginning of last week to get the latest on the aid situation, and we will continue to work with.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Foreign Secretary states that he believes in a two-state solution, as I have done since at least the 1973 Yom Kippur War, but that Hamas mustn't be a part of it. Does he agree with me that the best chance there ever was for the two-state solution was when Israel withdrew in 2005 from the Gaza Strip, but Hamas was then elected in January 2006 and has been in power there ever since and is still managing to hang on? So does he accept that if ever the government did recognise a Palestinian state, it would have to be the West Bank without the Gaza Strip, given the internecine slaughter between Hamas on the one hand and the PLO on the other, which followed the last withdrawal?
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman that Hamas cannot continue to govern in Gaza, and I suspect that everyone in this chamber agrees with that. I do believe that there are prospects beyond that. Indeed, when the IRA laid down their arms, that's a template for how you can demilitarise and how leaders, perhaps in this circumstance, can exit Gaza. But I do say to him, that the continued undermining of the Palestinian Authority by the Israeli government, including the starvation now of their funds, is also trying an attempt to not get to that two-state solution, which all of us in this House want to see.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Foreign Secretary, we watch families surveying the ruins of their homes being mocked by illegal settlers in the West Bank. A little boy looking at his dead relative, waiting for him to take another breath. I watched a mother whose baby had its leg amputated before it even got to take its first step. Where is our humanity? And I asked the Foreign Secretary, to have a two-state solution, we need two states. Let's just recognise Palestine. Or tell me what the words I need to say to the Foreign Secretary to get our government to make real, meaningful action. Tell me what to say and I'll say it.
Well, I'd say to my honourable friend that we do need humanity, and everything that this government has done has been to ensure that there is that humanity and to ensure the dignity of the Palestinian people and the hostages that are still underground. We will continue everything that we have. We'll throw everything at it to get that ceasefire. That is what we're doing. I sense her frustration, and many in the chamber. I'm as frustrated as she is, but it's not frustration alone will not deliver what we want to see.
Manuela Pertegella.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the Israeli government should bear heavy consequences should it decide to proceed with the approval of the illegal E1 settlement plan in occupied East Jerusalem, which will threaten the two-state solution?
Well, the last government, back in 2014, suggested there would be consequences if they move forward with E1. And so it's absolutely the case that there would be, not just from the UK, but from all international partners, if they made such a move.